Alright, so today we are going to be building a home lab with the ZimaCube Pro, so let's get started. I do want to thank Icewheel for sending me the ZimaCube Pro for a review, and everything we talk about will be linked down in the description below. Now before we begin, I do have to recommend Naz Compare's video on the ZimaCube Pro. He did such an amazing job with it, and every fine detail that you want to know about it, especially like the PCIe lanes and all the other stuff, can be found in his video, so I recommend checking it out. Now, everything I talk about will be almost like regurgitating the same data, but I am going to get the gist of everything out in this video. Alright, so this is the ZimaCube developed by Icewheel. Now, to begin, this has a front panel that I could just pop off, and it reveals the 6x4. Now, technically this is a 6x6, but yeah, you have 6 bays here that actually houses full 3.5-inch drives or 2.5-inch, depending on what you have. And in my case, I have 4 of these drives populated, and if I show you the empty ones, it'll look like this, and it has screw holes for 2.5, as well as this right over here. So there's a little thumb screw that you could screw off, and if you open this up, this will actually give you a little new 4x4 NVMe drive. Now you can fit full size and other sizes on here as well. And then on the bottom you have a little ESP controller that actually just controls the LED up in front. But yeah, you do get 6 3.5-inch drive support as well as 4 NVMe. And I said technically 6 because you still have 2 more NVMe's inside the motherboard itself. So let me just slide this back in. Also in front you have your power button, your 3.5mm headphone jack, USB-C, and 2 USB-A's up in front. Now in the back of this, we have your power connector. So it actually doesn't have a PSU on here. You have your USB Thunderbolt 4 connectors, a 10 gigabit Ethernet adapter, then 2 2.5 gigabit Ethernet adapters, as well as 2 USB-A's on the bottom. Now off to the side you have your display port and then your HDMI, which technically you don't really need. And then you have optional ports over here for PCIe cards. Now on the bottom of this, we actually have a tray that is held on by clips, which I am not a huge fan of at all, but it will reveal 2 fans over here that will actually blow this way to the front. Now these 2 fans are actually very slim. So somebody's already actually designed a cover for this that will house standard size 80mm fans in the back. But I gotta say that these fans are a little bit loud. So if you are keeping this near you, I would recommend replacing these first thing. Now moving on to the top portion of this ZimaCube. Alright, so here we have the ZimaCube in the inside, and it might look like a standard ITX motherboard, but it is completely different. Now one thing is that it doesn't support any PSU, so it does run everything off this 19-volt barrel connector right over here, as well as to control and manage the stuff underneath, which is the NVMe drives and the SATA. It uses these 2 EDP connectors, which is the first time I've ever seen anyone do this, which also means that you're kind of locked into this setup. If anything was to break, you can't just randomly swap a motherboard and have it work. You will have to be using the same type of motherboard that supports the EDP, and vice versa. If something was to break like on the motherboard, you can't just use the chassis for something else because there's no other motherboard that supports this type of EDP connection for SATA drives and NVMe's. But with that being said, I think it was very innovative for them to actually squeeze out every last inch of this motherboard to do that. On top of that, they have this tiny little cooler on top of the i5 CPU. On any temperature change, this kicks in almost at full speed, so it actually makes this very loud. And 2, it blows this way on top of the NVMe drive that's right underneath, which also can make this very hot. But they did come with an upgraded cooler, which is this guy right over here. It has a lot of heatsink fins, bigger fan, and this is much quieter. And it actually keeps this thing a lot cooler. But with that being said, moving on, we have another NVMe slot right over here for the 10 gigabit Ethernet. So if you don't have 10 gigabit Ethernet at home, you can replace this with another NVMe drive. That's why I said this is a 6x6, because technically you get 2 NVMe drives here as well as 4 underneath. Now off to the side, you have your 16 gigabyte DDR5 RAM, which is upgradable. And then you have your 2 PCIe slots right over here. Now this might look like a 16X, but in reality it only supports 8X, and then you have the 4X underneath. Now if you have any cards that's low profile like this is a 1030 low profile GPU, or something like this, a low profile NVMe drive, you can utilize these to upgrade your storage or get better performance for your GPUs. Alright, so this is how the new cooler looks. That still has some noise to it, but it's a lot quieter than the original, and it doesn't seem to be blowing all the heat towards the NVMe anymore. As a matter of fact, I think it's now cooling it down. So in future versions, if you are getting the Pro, you will be receiving this new cooler instead of the old one. Now what originally ships with this device is ZimaOS. Now let me tell you something.
Let me tell you something!
The operating system itself still has not caught up with, I would say, the hardware. The hardware on this is actually very good, but the operating system itself is still not there yet, equipped to handle all of that, you could say. Even the most basics of the operating systems like Open Media Vault has more system data for your hard drives, like smart data, than what this operating system can provide. So I honestly will wait a little for this operating system to mature before using it in your infrastructure. So in the time being, I am going to use a different operating system. All right, to decide on what operating system I want to install over the Zima OS that it's currently using, I had a choice between 4 operating systems. So we have TrueNAS over here, and then another one would be called Rockstor. It's open source multi-arch NAS build, or Unraid, or Proxmox. Now, every environment is different depending on what you have set up already. Now, I do have a couple of NASs already set up. I do have a Proxmox server. So if I was to build this out and I had none of that, I might actually go with Proxmox because I want a full virtual environment as well as LXC containers, Dockers, and being able to run my own NAS. But since I do have that set up already on the back end, I don't need another Proxmox setup. So that eliminates this. Also, Proxmox is not a set and forget type of thing. You do need to maintain it at times. So it does get a little tedious on trying to manage your Proxmox. So we are not going to be using Proxmox on this setup. Now, I did think about Unraid. I really do like the front end, and it is a full NAS setup, and it supports a lot of apps. The only downside to Unraid is that it's not free. You do have to purchase it after a month. So for those who do want a set and forget solution with tons of apps and a very pretty interface, Unraid is definitely one of those that you want to keep in mind. Next up, we have Rockstor. Now, I did play around with Rockstor, and it runs really fast. Especially for something like this type of setup, I'll be able to fully set up a NAS easily with this. But I did want something with ZFS, which is a different RAID setup, so that's why I did not decide to use Rockstor instead. So I ended up with using TrueNAS Scale. Now, TrueNAS Scale gives you the ability to easily manage the entire NAS, like hard drives, smart data, backups, and everything, through a pretty user interface, as well as adding apps that you need. And it also supports virtual environments in case I need to spin up a Windows 11 machine or something. So TrueNAS Scale was top of my list for now, especially on this type of device. All right, so here we have the BIOS of the ZimaCube, as you can see. Project version ZCU 1.0, administrator, board manufacturer Icewheel, and you could see that it's running Ender Lake 12th gen i5-1235U. Total memory 16 gigs, and it's running DDR5. So in the advanced chipset, we have this, which is our CNVI and WWAN configurations. Not much to change over here. I'm gonna take a look at WWAN. Okay, it's disabled. Power and performance, you got your CPU, and you can turn on turbo performance and a few other stuff over here. Turbo mode is on, etc, etc. You got your GT for your graphic card, and a few things is disabled like Turbo GT. Thunderbolt configurations, you can set this up as well. Trusted computing, TPM, and then you got the NVMe configurations. I don't know why this says none, but maybe because this is for the front chassis. We got hardware, and these are your CPU fan limits, automatic mode, and 80 degrees full fan, etc, etc. We can't really change any of this, can I? Manual? I could. Well, not much configuration, so I'm just going to leave it in auto. Then power management. And one thing I do want to set up if it's here. Why do I not see it? Oh, okay. LAN configurations, onboard LAN 1 and 2, which is the 2.5 gigabytes LAN. And then you got your ACE HC control, which is your hard drive controller. I do have 4 hard drives in there, which is 2 terabytes, and I have 2 empty. Now, chipset, we have this one. VTD supported, so I could run virtualization, awesome. IOMMU, so I could pass through my graphic cards, awesome. And a few other things I could set up over here. Okay. USB controller, HD audio, security, boot. So you have your full screen logo, fast boot, boot menu, and stuff that you want to boot up with. I really don't see it. Let me see. Power and performance. Let's try to find it. What I'm trying to look for is on, power, off, or when you plug in the power, it will automatically turn back on. So if in case I lose power and this thing turns off, there's a way to turn it back on. Where is that config? It's got to be here. Wake on USB, wake on LAN. But why is it not here? Wake on real-time clock. Boot mode select with Pixie Boot. No. Power and performance, CPU. I really don't find it. If I missed it, let me know. but I'm pretty sure I don't see the option because it should have been very blatant. All right, let's do the boot override into our USB boot, and let's jump right into our USB. And here we go. We have Ventoy, and I do have a couple of stuff. You see I have Rockstar in here. I did test it out before. I have the old scale, and now I have the new one. I should have deleted that one, and a few other stuff in here. I did install Proxmox on here as well, but that's off another USB. But in this case, we're going to be using TrueNAS scale. Now I'm going to speed run this install because it's pretty simple. I'm just going to install it on the onboard NVMe that's on the motherboard. All right, so here we go. I actually managed to log into my TrueNAS scale, which is on the new ZimaCube. And you can see it's actually running on 16 gigs of RAM. It's up for 4 minutes right now. And it's got 10 cores. It's running 12th gen i5-1235U. So everything looks pretty standard. So the only thing I need to set up right now, or the first thing I need to set up right now, is my storage. So I'm going to go down the list right over here. Kind of like, if you ever see my videos on TrueNAS, I'll leave a link on the top right for you guys. But basically, I'm going to be doing the same steps as going down those same videos, which is set up my storage, then look at some apps and install some apps. So I'm going to hit storage, create a pool, name it data store, which is something I'm used to using. This new 24 update is actually slightly different when you're setting up storage. So I'm going to hit next. So I am going to be doing RAID 2. And this one requires, I think, 4 disk minimum, and that's all I got, giving me a total of 4 terabytes because I got 2 terabytes on each drive with 4 drives, so it's total 8 terabytes. But yeah, when you do a RAID 2 or RAID Z2, you basically do like a mirror type thing. So it's this size, 2 terabytes. The width is 4, and then I'm gonna go next. Actually, all this stuff I don't really need, so I'm just gonna go to save and review. Not that I don't need it, I could just skip it, they're optional. And then create pool. Confirm, create. And there you go, my RAID is created with ZFS with a RAID Z2. What's good about using something like TrueNAS is that you get all these disk health, which will automatically give you data if there's anything wrong with your hard drives or anything, or you could actually set up notifications to let you know that the disk is failing or not. All right, after this, now the next thing we want to set up is our data sets. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to add a data set, and parent path is data store, correct. Name, I'm just going to call this shares. And data set preset is going to be SMB. So I know that this is going to be shares, and I could create an SMB share. TrueNAS server must be joined to an Active Directory or have at least one local SMB user before creating an SMB share. That means I have to go to credentials. I'm going to go to local user. I am going to add a new user, which is going to be my name, Don. Username, set up a password, create a primary group, etc., etc. Shell no login, no SSH, I don't need it. Sudo commands, allow no, etc., etc. Allow commands, directory and permissions, and I'm going to save this. Now that this is created, I go back to my data set, add data set, name this to share, generic data set, SMB name share, save, enable the service, yes. And now I have my share or SMB share under my data store. All right, now to test out our SMB, head over to files, go to other location. And since I have too many TrueNASes because I was playing around with other stuff, I'm gonna type out the IP address. So it's SMB://192, there you go. And there you go, my share is right here. And I should be able to create a new folder. Perfect. And if I wanted to, I should be able to copy and paste some stuff over. So I got this, so I'm going to copy this, head over to my share, paste this. And there we go. So if I go over to dashboard, it's hard to see. It's only 200 megs. So I'm going to see if I can actually go over to storage and take a look if it used a little bit. Yeah, used 230 megabytes. There you go. All right, now that we got our shares working, we're going to head over to apps and we're going to start installing apps. I'm going to go over to discover apps, and here we have our list. Refresh the charts, and we're going to start off with something easy. So I'm going to install something called MeTube, which allows you to download YouTube videos. So I'm going to click here, and you can go down this list. Now, if you want the data to be actually on your mount volume, you could actually change this to host path and give it a host path, which would be mount, share, something, whatever you want to do. So anytime I download something, I'll actually go into this location. So in my case, I'm just gonna go to Share, ASDF, and Install. So anytime I download a YouTube video, it'll actually go right into ASDF. And now it's deploying. Since we have tons of RAM, which is 16 gigs of RAM, and we even have enough of ZFS cache, I should be able to install a bunch of applications on here, no problem. So let's head back into apps. It's still deploying. Let's go to a YouTube video. I'm gonna grab my latest video, so I'm just gonna go over here, copy link, head over here, still deploying. I think it's because it's the first time it's creating all the file structure like the XI system. So it might take a little bit longer, or it actually is downloading and deploying this. All right, so according to this, I have a permission issue with that file, so I'm not gonna really stress about this, but what I'm gonna do is actually change this configuration around. So in order to do that, I have to go here, delete this. Again, it's gonna take me a little bit to set all the permissions. I was just speed running some of the stuff to set up, which is like storage and data sets. But yeah, there are a lot of permissions that you gotta worry about. Anyway, moving forward, I'm going to go back to download apps, MeTube, install, but this time I'm not going to use the mount storage, and I'm just going to use the XI volume. And there we have our status as running. I'm going to go over here, web portal, make sure everything's running, paste my little video, add, and there you go. It's downloading that video, and if I wanted to check it out, I could actually download it back to my machine, and it's a WebM. Anyway, that's just one app of many that you can install. So if you want to install something like Plex, you could go down here, Plex, or if you wanted something like Jellyfin, you could just search for it, Jellyfin, and there you go. But again, I have to fix the permission issues before I could really install all these file systems, which is something you guys should play around anyway to familiarize yourself with the datasets and storage. But yeah, if you were to install Plex, you could just go in here, just remember to change the storage configurations. You should be able to install that. So next up we have virtualization. If I want to install a virtual machine, I can over here by adding a new virtual machine guest over here. Linux, system clock local, I'm gonna leave that as default. Password, I'm gonna give this 2 cores. Is that what it is? No, 2 threads, 1 thread, 2 cores. And in the memory, I'm gonna give this 2 gigs of RAM, 2048. Location, I'm gonna choose data store. I'm gonna give this 32 gigs of storage. Next, this is the NIC, and we are using 5. So next, install. We don't have any ISOs, so what I'm going to do is actually transfer one over. I'm going to go over to my downloads. I have an ISO which is right here. Copy, head over to share, and I'm just going to paste this ISO over here. And the machine that I'm using is only on a gigabit LAN, so it's not going to go 10 gigabit. As you can see right over here, it's about like 90 something on the average. And there you go. Let's go over to share and Zorin OS right here. Next, GPU. I don't want GPU. Next, go to display, that password that we made. And there we have our ISO. So I'm just going to go to try install Zorin, and then now we have our virtual machine running inside our TrueNAS with just a little modifications. Now I did do like a whole set of like, hey, let's go to permissions, go to share, and then go to edit, and then I did add a everyone tab over here, which is not something you should really do, but I just did this for the sake of getting it working. And then now I can go back into everything else and it just boots right up. Now, even with the virtual machine running, I do have 5.4 gigs of RAM free. I've used up 2 just for services, and the cache is 5 gigs as well. So yeah, I'm able to run my virtual machine and a few other things, but again, because I'm using ZFS and it runs off RAM, you have those times that you got to keep an eye on that. Ultimately, running a different OS than Zima OS on the ZimaCube will result in better turnover because it's just a more complete operating system. So I do recommend playing around with different operating systems for now, like I am over here. As far as a complete system, if you just need a NAS, to be honest, this does take some time to tinker with, just like their other boards like the Zima board and the Zima Blade. It's not something that it's just set up right away and works. If you are using their operating system and you are using their stuff, it will take a little bit of time for them to mature to get better RAID support. But if you are a fan of tinkering and playing around with this, I would highly recommend playing around with different operating systems. Anyway, if you guys got any questions about this, hit me up down in the comments below. And if you guys are new to this channel, consider subscribing and also hit that bell notification icon so you know when the next video is going to be out. And as I say in my nerd cave, hack till it hurts.